what's really important about being a CIO and facing into the board is it's not a purely technical conversation. In fact, it's never really a purely technical conversation, because a lot of the time you're the most technical person like at that table, right?
I was actually blessed with a cyber attack on my first day. So it was pretty amazing. Yeah, I actually at one point said, you can stop now. Simulation, have I passed?
Educate your workforce. And if that is that you're playing simulations like who got done for the fishing, who fell into they answered. So there's a couple of good games going on, and are you on the list that you went 5 more steps more than you should?
Yes. A lot of the times they don't really care about the tech, right? They care about the business acumen and that the business is kind of secure and safe from a kind of a public perception.
Today for our CIO studios. I want to throw to Brett first, actually, and just talk about your role and how you found yourself in a key change maker role. Talk us through that journey.
I guess look at my inspiration around how do you become a key change maker, especially for a not-for-profit organisation. So we don't produce something obviously that from an organisational perspective, but we produce impact. And how do you become an organisational change maker through an organisation like that? And my inspiration really around that was making sure that we provided the most amount of impact on the ground. So that means transformational journey as well, but not just technology. I think the key thing is around how do you make sure that the technology is successful as well once you deliver it. And one other key component is the change piece around that of adoption. We all forget that relatively easily. We deploy these great technology products. And so the change management around adoption is such a big piece as well.
Huge. And Danyal, we've actually met before at a previous event and we kind of spoke about your role as well. But how did you find yourself in the IT industry?
So I started at a very, very young age where I just like to break things apart and then put it all together again. I got fed up by telling my dad to take the computer back to the store to get it fixed all the time and then bring it back home. So I said, well, how about I just try and fix it myself? And then since then, it's just been kind of an inquisitive journey. And as you progress in life, you kind of just find out there's a lot more to it and you just kind of keep going with it. So, but also the impact that technology has, I guess, across any industry, any sector, there's some sort of need for technology. So I kind of find it quite interesting for the change that can happen because of technology in any industry. So
yeah, especially now
Absolutely.
as well. We're at that pivotal moment. I mean, Mel, how did you find yourself in IT?
Yeah, I actually don't have an IT background, so I found myself transition in my career. So I actually studied business and marketing, and I did a Masters of Marketing, and I actually found myself in change programs. They became a bit of a passion, and transformation was something I really love to do. So I found myself then on the journey of technology, and I've been there for many years now, and I just love it because there's always something new. You never know what you're going to face tomorrow, and it's a really exciting place to be.
Well, transformation is definitely a key theme of this discussion as well. I'm going to throw to Chris now, actually, and talk through, I guess, how you see the role of a CIO kind of evolving at the moment.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I have to say, I think the C role of a CIO is probably one that's going through so much change at the moment. If you think about CEO and CFO, they're kind of known roles, known commodities, but I have to say the CIO role is going through so much change. And that's not that surprising if you think about everything that's coming down the track in AI and everything that's coming and challenges that the industry is facing. And new roles that have emerged, like Chief Digital Officer, Chief Technology Officer, Chief Analytics Officer, the CISO. And for a lot of organisations, the CIO has all of those roles reporting to them. And so I think that it's an interesting time for CIOs. Their status is quite elevated now. They're, for a lot of them, reporting directly into the CEO. And when the board's asking big questions like what's happening with cyber, what's happening with AI, invariably I'm noticing that it's the CIO that has to kind of come up with a plan to answer that. So I think it's a good time to be a CIO, as challenging as the role is.
Yeah, it's definitely an exciting time, but we know that CIOs are getting pressure from boards as well. I mean, Stevie, how do you kind of communicate with your board to make sure that they understand the power of technology, but also knowing how much it costs as well and everything like that?
Oh, they know how much it costs. So I just reflecting on Mel's point, like I also spent a really big part of my career in non-tech roles. I've done everything from risk and compliance to product to strategy, innovation, transformation, and then tech. And what's really important about being a CIO and facing into the board is, like, it's not a purely technical conversation. In fact, it's never really a purely technical conversation, because a lot of the time you're the most technical person like at that table, right? And it is so having grounding, it's important to have technical grounding as a CIO, but having that breadth has really served me well, and some of the best CIOs that I see have that breadth because they can have conversations about technology in a business context, which doesn't just talk about the tech, but we really talk about, okay, what is the problem we're trying to solve, and how does technology enable that in a context that's, balancing both risk and transformation, costs and revenue. All of those things are really, really important, but it's a broad conversation as opposed to like a really deeply technical one.
Definitely. Well, I know, Danyal, we kind of were speaking before about extroverts and introverts in the tech industry as well. And I mean, you mentioned that you're an extrovert. Does that help you with communicating with the board and also the powers that be?
Absolutely. So I think any board wants to have the confidence that the leaders they have in place have it under control. The last thing that any board wants to hear is that you're going to the board with problems, as opposed to there's a problem and we have a solution and we're executing on it now. So I think being an extrovert kind of helps exert that kind of confidence into the board that they've got the right person in the job, but also it then gives the perception that you can actually talk the lingo. And as kind of Stevie said earlier, a lot of the times they don't really care about the tech, right? They care about the business acumen and that the business is kind of secure and safe from a kind of a public perception. And this is kind of the key thing to any business, right? It's their perception in the marketplace. So I think without the right people that can actually talk in confidence to the board, then you're kind of in trouble if you're not able to, express that to the board.
Definitely. Actually, this might be a good moment to kind of talk to Chris, because Chris, I know you speak to many tech leaders, or pretty much day in, day out. Do you find that you're helping them as well with the communication and building that business case as well to communicate that with the board?
I mean, I pick up on Daniel's point around communication, actually, because I would posit that a lot of CIOs still need to pick up those soft skills. And maybe historically we're able to trade on the brightest person in the room who had a lot of technology knowledge, but you really have to, back to Stevie's point, you really need that broad appreciation on how am I communicating the case for change. And that case for change has many different audiences and many different stakeholders buying into it. And interestingly, Maddie, if you look at all decisions today compared to maybe even a decade ago, you'll have 6, 7, 8 people in the decision-making cycle, as there were a decade ago, where it may have been line of sight, the CIO to the CEO, we're signing off on this and we're moving forward. So I think communication often doesn't get enough of a voice because it's just such a critical skill to getting that case for change up. Because, we talk about the rational, logical approach, but we're humans, and so emotion comes into it. And I think the CIOs that have that broader perspective on, hey, what are all the drivers going on here? Not just the ones that I can directly see, all of those other drivers, and how do I make sure I'm communicating in different ways, using different mediums to appeal to what you might like compared to what Mel might like. So I think that you can't be glib about it. You have to have a pretty good handle on how do I communicate and kind of strategise to that.
Yeah.
Maddie, I was going to say, just to add to Chris's point, I think the relationship side is really, really important, and building that trust, and very much having your technology strategy should be, very ingrained and really part of your business strategy. And I think building that trust and capability, and also there's lots of knowledge, let's face it, like technology now these days, people are tinkering, they're really interested, and so a way that I found in terms of communication and building that trust is working with those stakeholders and customers and partners quite intimately, because that way you get a better outcome.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, definitely. I can see Brett nodding in the side of my eye. And what's it like in the non-for-profit sector? Is it a similar sentiment as well?
I think it definitely is, and more so as well, is we have a limited amount of funding. So I think rather than obviously your corporate organisations who can keep throwing money at things when they aren't going right, it's the ability to shuffle from having a conversation with your team around a technical outcome to a business outcome, which is then with the board, and then somewhere in between for the rest of the business as well. But I think to the point that was taken here around, you've got to spend time out in the business, one, to really understand, but they need to understand and be confident that you are actually going to deliver what you've said you're going to deliver as well. So I think there's a level of trust in there that's got to be won as well, rather than just saying, I know what I'm talking about and this is what's going to happen. And I think that's probably the key thing, especially from a not-for-profit, because you haven't got a board. We've got a big board and varying degrees of sort of skills and within the board. But I think what we're trying to do is accommodate someone who is more from the humanitarian side rather than the commercial side, whereas most boards would have a commercial aspect as well. So it's about making sure that you understand, okay, well, this is what we're going to do from the humanitarian side. We're going to deliver this and here is the outcome. But from a commercial side, okay, we are going to give you this return and benefit on this investment as well. And it's not just a monetary thing either. It's what is the impact that we're going to provide out in the community.
Yeah, definitely. And even from a banking perspective, I'm sure the sentiment would be very similar as well, Stevie. And I mean, what sort of pressure are you kind of feeling from the board at the moment? Is there any sort of pressure to adopt new technologies? Is it like, adopt AI right now, we need some AI in the systems, figure it out, here's some money?
Here's some money would be nice. We're quite similar, like as a mutual bank. So is it like, I've spent my whole career in big banks and like fairly recently moved to the mutual sector, and it is quite similar in the fact that you don't have huge budgets, and this money is customer money because all the money that we make goes back into the business to continue to deliver value. So you where you do want to make really interesting investments, and you've got to balance that trade-off between compliance and innovation, and you want to keep moving the business forward. You really do have to look at every dollar. And yes, there is absolutely excitement from the team, from the board, to adopt new technologies. The thing I think about as a CIO is, you shouldn't be looking for a solution first. You need to think about what is the business problem we're trying to solve, and that's the first thing I always talk about. And then it's really important to say to yourself, well, does this problem need nascent or proven technology? You don't always have to go to let's get the newest,
the shiny new toy.
What is the best way to solve this problem? And a lot of the time, and how do we measure that? Because with new technology, it's very easy to get carried away with, I want to adopt this and that and whatever. But how do you know it's successful? And again, these just come back to really basic business measures, right? How is it going to reduce cost? Is it going to make us money? Is it going to increase customer satisfaction? There's nothing new in that. It's like business 101. I always try to bring back the fundamentals of that whenever we make a decision about what is the best solution for this problem.
I completely agree, and I know Chris would agree with me. They would probably be the questions that they would be asking you as well. I
just love where Stevie went, which is there's something beautiful about sometimes being really boring. The energy around what is the problem we're trying to solve, has this been proven before, how much is at risk? I think there's so much that goes into just getting that right, and I would say resist the urge to go all in on something without having done the due diligence on it. And invariably I've seen too many examples where customers have gone in on the promise of something, momentum has waned, the money ran out, we were never quite sure the problem problem we were trying to solve. We kind of got carried away with it, and then you end up down the path. You almost have this, oh, we should just keep going, and you end up throwing money hand over fist because you're so far in now. Your ability to come back feels like, would I just sink the costs that I've made there? So I think there's something so powerful about, you know, bringing the energy back to the due diligence that is required, and resisting the urge sometimes for the shiny and new, and to sit in the space of, let's work to the integrity of who we are as a company and what's right for us. So I completely agree with Stevie's point.
I think as well, we've had a lot of roundtable events where the sentiment has been, let's answer the question, why? Why are we doing this? What is the why? I know Danyal as well, we've had a few conversations about this, about the why and why we would adopt new technologies. I mean, what sort of challenges have you found facing adopting any new tech?
Well, there's the 5 whys that I continue to kind of go back and ask 5 times, and hopefully if you can answer all 5, then there's a need, there's a problem, and there's a need for a change. But a lot of the times it's kind of about, well, let's harness about what we have and the skill sets that we have in the team in order to address this issue, as opposed to trying to go and buy the latest and greatest, and then nobody in the team wants it because nobody knows it, no one has the skill, and then it becomes more of a burden as opposed to actually helping us fix our problems. So a lot of the time it's, what are the issues and what are the skill sets that we have in-house in order to ensure that we can deal with this, and also have the momentum to keep maintaining it and driving it forward, as opposed to, this was a solution that was done by so-and-so, and hence it's become a black box because now nobody knows it. And this is now going to hurt us going forward because actually nobody knows, well, how do we police it? How do we make it work? What's the value that we can drive out of it? So this is kind of the key thing that I feel like we always look at our people, and our job as leaders isn't all the time, or even most of the time, about the tech, but rather the people that we have. Whether we're talking up or talking down, the people that we have around us are kind of the tools that we have to work with. So unless I can extract all the value from the tools that I have in hand, then really I've got nothing to work with. And I'm going back to basics again. So they're kind of the key strategies that we look at about what do we have in-house, and do we really need to go out, or could we come up with this in-house?
Just on the back of that, Danyal, is around business-led change. There's been a significant shift over the last sort of 5 to 10 years, shifting away from IT-driven change to business-led change. That is a significant change because what it is, as you said, it's not IT now driving the business. We're an enabling part of that function. But the decisions that are made at a business level. And I think it's really important, as you said, to go back to that, why are we doing it and what's the purpose, but also that business-led piece as well.
And I think Chris made a fantastic point about people just throwing money at the shiny new toys and all of that kind of thing. But often as well, we found that the conversations then, we talk about the foundation behind this as well, and making sure our data is mature, but also looking at kind of the key infrastructure and the critical infrastructure as well. And Brett, I want to throw to you and maybe talk about a success story that you found when it comes to security network infrastructure. And I know you've worked with Chris before. Talk us through that kind of journey.
I think, so looking at we run a retail sort of network of about 180 stores. And looking at obviously what was delivered there was a pretty boring project, as we sort of spoke about. But it was a significantly different project where we've got retail stores that are run by members. And so it could be out in the middle of absolutely nowhere. So we don't have the skills and we don't have those pieces there. So it's about where Chris's team ran that project, and I think there was a lot of learnings on there as well. But also what it meant was securing that endpoint and that piece of the edge of the network where we don't have any visibility either. And it is such an important piece, and that was where TPG sort of jumped in and took over that change agent role and made sure that we actually had the processes in place and these other components before we pressed the button. So really great success story, and really important for us because that is right at the edge of our network, and so there's a possibility of someone coming in and actually potentially compromising that, and then they come back into the network that way. So I think that was probably one of the success stories as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Chris, talk us through what it was like working with Red Cross.
I mean, Australian Red Cross is just a fabulous organisation to be part of, and to the humanitarian point, I think it's felt across all of the employees that work in that. So it taught us a lot around empathy and engagement. But the point Brett makes around, 180 stores, and you can, clothing donation centres, and in your local suburb you'll have an Australian Red Cross, and they do such such great work, but I think we probably had to upgrade our file a little bit. You know, we'll work with teams in fin services sector and construction sector. They have IT teams and they know where the comms room is, or they know where the comms rack is, or they know these things. And so it was a wonderful learning exercise for us to say we're walking into a site with a volunteer who's working part-time, whose job in life is to help people in their 6-hour shift or 8-hour shift. Our job now is to help them. And so we did some great work around learning guides and how-to guides, and we're turning up on this day, and just had that human-to-human interaction, and we got the tech out of the way and really modernised the connectivity, of course, modernised the Wi-Fi network, all of those great things. But it's one of those relationships we actually probably learnt we got more from it by delivering to Red Cross, and I think it was a lovely humanitarian story in the sense that our field services team loved visiting those sites, and we told stories about, you know, who we met at the site, what we needed to do, and so, you know, I just think more of that in business is so important, and to get out of that transactional interaction. And to Brett's point, it was a pretty basic modernisation program. We were upgrading the data network and the voice network, so it wasn't as if we were landing people on the moon, but we took away from it just such great experiences about people working with people, as I've always said, and hopefully long may it last. There's still a lot of that into the future.
Definitely. I can hear Danyal thinking away.
Yeah, I just come back and I say this day and age, and especially coming the back of COVID, where we've all kind of got used to working remotely and, you know, kind of working online a lot more than, you know, interacting with people at a kind of a human-to-human, you know, physical presence. We kind of lost a little bit of that culture that we generally had. And, you know, we used to turn things around a lot quicker in a business when we had that human-to-human interaction, where I kind of say, well, people were working a lot longer during COVID, I get that, and people were probably, you know, because they had to schedule meetings to catch up with somebody and so forth, as opposed to being able to just walk down for a coffee or walk down over to somebody and say, hey, can we do this, blah, 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 and even just brainstorm. Because then while the idea is hot, you can kind of talk about it and kind of try and map it out, if you like, as opposed to, okay, I've got to see Stevie, let me just check her calendar. Is she available? Oh, well, I've now lost interest anyway, right? Next week, maybe when I see her. So I think, you know, we've lost a bit of that human-to-human interaction. So it's not just about external vendors or customers, but also internal as well, and just bringing that culture back into the office or into the workplace that I feel that has a lot more value. And we're starting to look at that now. So we used to be able to turn these things around a lot quicker than now, and maybe we should start bringing people back in and actually interacting a lot more with people.
I think you're definitely right when saying that COVID changed a lot, that's for sure. I think it changed the structure of every business in some way, shape or form. I mean, how much did it affect you guys, Mel?
Yeah, absolutely. I think COVID sort of created, you know, convenience for us all because everyone's been able to integrate work and life and work from home. But I think also it created a bit of distance and it made it hard for people, I think, coming back as well, because there is that balance that people want to maintain. So they like the flexibility, but also what we've acknowledged is the ability to have those hallway conversations, and tech and change and transformation is all about relationships and influencing, and it's really hard to do that over a Teams call or a Zoom call, right? You can do the transactional stuff, but the relationships are human, and you need them. It needs to be a combination. So.
Well, there's no doubt in saying that we all had a meeting over Teams to prepare for this chat, but I think we had more meaningful conversations just in the room next door. So it does tell us a lot when we have those conversations and all of that, and instead of sending each other emails and things. But I know we need to get as I said, the foundations right, but also get the network security and connectivity right to be able to connect as well and to be able to do our remote work and everything like that. I wanted to talk to Stevie actually around if you faced any challenges around network security or connectivity, or where you see Beyond Bank going in that direction.
Yeah, I think so. I'll pick up on the point about like culture and building culture in person. Like, I'm a very big fan of the anchor day. So, you know, I'm totally a fan of flexibility, and I think it's really important for people to be able to integrate in work and life. And it depends on the person you are. Like, I like to go to work. So, I like to be in the office, also an extrovert. So I want to be talking to people face to face and whatever. But I recognise, and especially in technology, you have probably a critical mass of introverts, so like they loved COVID. but you see the difference. It's beautiful when you have like that time where you have your team all in place. And in many organisations, what we've done is said not just put like tech in on Mondays or whatever, is that actually like cross-functional teams in on the same day that are all solving the same business problem, because it's really important to be able to have like the engineer can't like code without understanding like what is the outcome that they're trying to achieve. So you need to have that cross-functional mix, and having those anchor days where teams are all together are really great. Having days where someone comes into the office and just sits on Zoom all day or Teams or whatever is not great, right? So that's why I think the flexibility is really critical. The technology infrastructure behind it has to work. There is nothing worse than coming in and like not being stuck at home and not being able to connect, right? Like, so that I think many businesses have invested huge amounts in being able to have that infrastructure that scales accordingly as well, which is really good. And you had to almost do that overnight, because it was like, I remember, like all of a sudden they're like, next week we're sending everyone home, and I was like, no. And then you go, I've actually got to be able to enable my team to be able to work. And particularly for call centres, like because it was such high volume and specific technical needs, and being able to take calls and not disrupt the customer service, like a lot of different things to think about. And then yes, like security, the environment has become increasingly more turbulent in these days. Like there are the organisations that the criminal organisations that are out there are actually way better resourced and better funded, and like the scale than any business. And I've worked in large and small, right? And you cannot keep pace. But at the risk of being the world's most boring CIO, like that's the first thing I always look at is like, actually, I'm a bank. And at the very basis, like that relationship with customers is built on trust, right? And what they do is they say, here's my money. I trust you to do two things. Keep it secure and give it to me when I want. And those two things, like if you translate into technical speak, is just security and availability. Boring. Below the glass, not the sexy UI stuff you want to be doing as a CIO, but it needs to be done. So critical. And so I've always had such a strong focus on how do we ensure resiliency, currency, like in banking, there's a lot of legacy tech, modernization, platform-based architecture, things that help you do your job well. And security, really, you won't keep pace. So the importance is you've got to, like any training, you've got to practice, like game days, red teaming exercises, spend the money to get the right people, get your playbooks in place, like all of those things, because it's not if, it's when. And a big part of what will make you successful or help you as an organisation is your ability to gracefully recover.
Definitely. Definitely.
And I think there's so much the similarities between our two organisations, because where people give us money to go and actually do something as well. And so it's really important, one, we keep that money safe, but then we actually go and do something effective as well. And the security component around, we capture a large amount of really vulnerable people's information as well. So that security piece, and we went through a significant transformation over the last 18 months. And it wasn't a question that I'd said to the board as we will get breached at some stage. And I said, we just need to make sure we are ready, and we've had those simulations, and we really can respond to those in a short amount of time, determine have we had a data breach, or is it just a privacy breach, or is it just a tech piece? And being a humanitarian organisation, we're not going to pay a ransom. And so for us, it's really making sure that obviously we can react and respond to those organisations in a short amount of time when they happen.
Yeah, and Chris, I know we've obviously had recent, in the last kind of 12 months, there was publicised news around outages, but also security breaches of really major Australian companies.
Yeah.
But when a leader comes to you and expresses concern around this, I mean, what do you kind of tell them to kind of let them know, look, TPG's there for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's been tough across many industries. And I think there's two big things going on for a lot of industries. One, does everyone know where their assets are? And a lot of those assets are ageing. And so have organisations really understood where all of those assets are, the age of those assets and what's going on? And then two, back to something Daniel said earlier, people and skills. And lots of organisations undergoing change lose a lot of their domain knowledge when they lose talent and lose resource. And so I think there's a bit of a perfect storm where you've got the surface area of everyone's world expanding. You've got people at home, apps in the cloud, apps on-prem, whole heaps of different third-party actors coming in and out of your ecosystem. So the surface area has increased so much. If you don't know where all your assets are, if you don't have all of the skill inside the organisation that often has enough corporate memory to say, hey, I know how this application works. And so you can see that there's already a vulnerability in, have I got my house in order? And then to Stevie's point, there's some bad actors out there who are getting more and more and more sophisticated. And so the landscape for, thankfully, not just the CISO, thankfully I have observed this last period, it is becoming a board issue. It is the conversation that every CEO needs to know, where am I at on my risk? Where am I at on my governance? Where am I at on my education? And we've been spending a lot of time at TPG, not only, I mean, we're in the business of having very resilient and very redundant networks. Every telco the world over has to know that they are building for resiliency at the core. And that may be around how we physically and logically separate the networks so that when we do have a risk, we can lock it down and sort of quarantine it. But I think it also has a lot to do with education, and Stevie touched on it about, are you doing the simulations? Are you doing the exercises? For me, I would say we've got to make it a continuous thing. This is not solved for, it's only going to evolve and evolve. So I think educate your workforce, have them really understand what's going on. And if that is that you're playing simulations like who got done for the fishing, you know, who fell into the, they answered. So there's a couple of good games going on, and are you on the list that you went 5 more steps more than you should? So you can bring it to life and kind of have a bit of fun with it, because I think this is now a table stakes issue. It is not acceptable any longer for organisations to sort of have their head in the sand on it. They've got to get themselves ready, they've got to get themselves organised. And then I think there's a piece around transparency. They need to be able to say, hey, we got it wrong and here's how we're getting it right, and having that transparency of communications. And back to where we started today, communication. And regrettably, we probably saw a couple of examples where the communication out the back end of it wasn't great. And which is why it's just, you know, you've got to be very, very good at your transparency and your communication. So
I want to hone into something you said as well. You mentioned resilience too, and I might throw to Mel here as well. I know you've also worked with Chris.
Yes.
Talk us through, I guess, how that project helped with resilience as well, within, especially with operational technology as well. And talk us through that.
Totally. I would say, I think I've told you the story, Chris, and I was actually blessed with a cyber attack on my first day. So it was pretty amazing. I actually at one point said, you can stop now. And have I passed? But I remember my first moment back into the office, because we were actually out on a rig and I was doing site visits and I was in my full PPE gear, so I was dressed for the occasion, raced back into Sydney to help the team. But what I would say is that, you know, lots of lessons learnt, and you know, I guess a really good way to build relationships and, you know, really and internally and externally. But what I would say is all of the comments around the table so far really resonated with me, because you can't, you know, as Stevie said earlier, like you can't protect against everything. So it's about identifying what are the biggest key threats for your organisation, aligning that with the executives, aligning it with the board, and then you're actually continually investing to protect against those. And people are your first line of defence. That is absolutely so true. You know, we can all joke about the fish. I think that's great, the fishing games and all that sort of stuff, but it is absolutely so true. And I think sometimes we forget cyber's, you know, of course it's technical, but it's actually the people that are, you know, at the front line 100%. Of your business. So,
100%. Has anyone actually had an employee fall victim to a phishing test? Anyone know of anyone?
Yeah, I think it's quite common. I think you can't, for me, you've also got to instill the safety mechanism of being able to make a mistake and fall into a trap, and then how do I get out of that? How do I recover and own up to it, as opposed to try and hide it or mask it? It makes the job so much more difficult. So I think, again, back to the points that Mel, Chris have raised, education, communication, and building that safety environment where we're humans. We are going to make a mistake, but then how are we able to recover from that, or be able to react, raise it, and then being able to kind of come to a solution quickly, whether you're going to isolate or, you know, or kind of close the open door that was kind of, that has been, you know, inadvertently opened. People need to be able to speak up, and you've got to instill a culture of comfort and confidence that people are going to make a mistake, how we're going to react to it, as opposed to, well, we've clicked on it, but no one's going to know for now.
It's not going to tell anyone.
A couple of days later, and things start to go funny, and it's like, oh, well, this has been happening for the past 48 hours, but no one's realised it.
No one's mentioned anything. So. I think it's a good point around disaster recovery as well, and our plan for that, because as Stevie said, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So what's our disaster recovery plan afterwards as well? I mean, how did TPG kind of help you with that side of things as well?
So we had no resilience at all before TPG came in for our retail stores. So there was a mixture of probably 10 years of legacy. Someone needed a connection and someone would go and get it, and then someone else would buy it, member would go and buy it. So there was no real resilience built into any of that network. So we run, obviously from a compliance perspective, we run members and volunteers doing compliance out there, so quite important. But also we run all our POS networks as well. And so we couldn't then take sales if obviously that network was down. So the component obviously we looked at TPG was we had a main sort of service that would run in, but then we had a 4G backup. And but I don't think we've actually managed to cut across to any of those 4G backups over the period of time that we've had the service in. And so I think from a resilience perspective, the network that TPG have put in has been great, but we've got that backup there if we ever needed it. And we're talking about some really remote sites as well, so it's not within the metropolitan area.
Well, I know Mel's probably in a similar position where you've probably got sites that are quite remote as well. I mean, what it's kind of your plan when it comes to disaster resilience and recovery as well?
Yeah, I think it's about, and I think Chris said it before, it's about knowing where your assets are, being very deliberate around your strategies to protect, get them back up. But I mean, you'd be surprised, you know, businesses, they don't have a good handle on where all their assets are, and it is ageing technology, ageing infrastructure that really impacts the vulnerabilities that occur, because it's those things that get left out there in a technology project that may not get finished, or that archiving that someone wants something and you turn it back on but it hasn't been, you know, patched the right way or managed the right way, and they're the key things that you kind of think about, not that big a deal, need the information, but actually they're critical because they are the things that can make the biggest difference.
Yeah, so, definitely.
Yeah.
I know Stevie mentioned legacy systems as well, and I mean, Chris, how much does, when it comes to your clients and your partners, how much does legacy systems kind of hold them back when it comes to modernising?
Yeah, it's really hard, right? Because it's hard for one project to pay for all of the legacy that needs to be resolved. And I also have a theory that we're moving at such pace now. I don't know how much our people want to wait for the digital transformation project that's coming 5 years down the track. I think people are looking for more, you know, improvements that are here and now, and moving in more agile sprints to be able to deliver improvements now. So I think the days of the wait for 5 years and it will all be solved for, I think people are tired of that, because their lived experience is really difficult. You know, they can be in a call centre and they're still hopping between 4 different applications to try and create a CX experience for the customer on the end of the phone. Or they're trying to be in the field trying to get, comms to work, and they've got different tablets or pieces of paper still. So I think that CIOs all have to work really hard to say, how can I drive incremental change and improve the lived experience for our people on the path to those digital transformation programs. And to your point, the younger organisations, I think, have a bit of a trick because they don't have all that tech debt. So I am watching younger organisations sort of have leaner models. They can kind of move a little bit quicker. So, for the larger organisations, I know there's a lot of programs underway on we have to bite it off one chunk at a time. And I kind of think the days of the 10-year, billion-dollar projects, I remember working for a CFO who used to say, halve the benefit and double the cost. That's about where you'll get to on those projects, and I think that might be the case.
We're hearing, obviously, instances of rising tech debt as well, because we want to get the most out of these projects that we spend our money on. So, I mean, how do you balance operational efficiency, but also with having some sense of innovation as well in these digital projects? How do you kind of strike that balance?
It is really tricky. I mean, it's probably top of mind of every CIO is like wanting to go fast, but like I'm almost certain everyone's got legacy, and I mean, definitely in the banking industry we do. But it's a bit to your point about like painting the vision of like a target state, and I'm not a fan of saying a target state is fixed in this like day and age. It's a floating target state, but experiment, because that's really important. It reduces the risk that you've got against something, like especially if it's an uncertain outcome. And then, look at where you are today, really understand what are the problems we're trying to solve, what are the challenges of the current state, where do we want to get to in a shorter interval of time, but then what are the migration states or what are the transition states between, and have people work to those next intervals, because you don't, with legacy technology, you don't bite it off in one chunk. It's like a series of small chunks. And some good examples of like businesses I've seen where they, take a part of their business and they build it on a modern stack, and then they try that out, and we prove the solution in this smaller part of the business that's lower risk, and then if that's successful, you work on how would you migrate to the modern stack. So that's another way.
Definitely. And I know, Danyal, our conversation when we were at that event, that fireside chat, was definitely around this balance between between having that agility and focusing on innovation, but then also providing some stability as well.
You want to get value, obviously, of any solution that you're going to. And I think just back on that point, when you're building new solutions and so forth, and I think lots of things come into mind. I think, historically, we've built solutions like, okay, is there a primary, is there a master, and that's kind of your redundancy and so forth. And I'm like, well, these days are kind of gone. It's no longer about having 2 of everything so that, if one fails, the other one can kick in, but more about diversification, resilience, and business continuity. So I kind of forget about what is disaster recovery opposed to resilience and having the diversification across all of your stack, and then is it business continuity? The business needs to run. Nobody needs to know that we failed and we moved to a backup. If I'm talking about the telco side, we've got, these WAN links and we've now failed to our backups, 4G, whatever. The links have gone down because the size of the links are actually much smaller because we're on a backup. That's no longer justifiable to any business, and it's not acceptable either, because now the productivity of the people that are working has now changed, and they've got to readjust that expectation. So as a leader, when we're looking at problems and solutions, the solutions can't always be driven by, the leader, because you've also got to accept that you don't have all the solutions. Just because we're the leader doesn't mean that we actually have all the solutions and we're giving the direction, opposed to actually there's a lot more people that are a lot more clever and a lot more knowledgeable across all these different solutions that can be implemented. So you're kind of there to kind of, set the mood and provide that safety culture where people people can kind of express those things and be able to practice it, in safe environments. And you start, by little chunks, as you said, Stevie, and then you kind of move on to deploying it in production and so forth. Once you've been able to perfect it in this small, environment that's kind of isolated, that allows you to fail and allows you to test all those different elements. So, yeah, I think business continuity and diversification is kind of the key for us going forward, as opposed to, we just have a backup of that and that should be enough.
Yeah, definitely. Now, look, guys, I'm going to ask you all to maybe put your crystal balls out. We're going to. I want to hear maybe predictions of where you see the role of the CIO going in the future. I might throw to you, Brett, first, and what will the role change a lot in the next kind of 5 years?
I think we've seen a significant change in the last 5 years already. So it's less of hiding back in the back room and being asked to do something, to more you're front of mind, you're driving, and you're actually pushing and reporting to the board as well. Whereas that probably wouldn't have happened 5 to 10 years ago. So I think the change in the role is really going to be someone who actually has a seat at the table. But it's beyond that. It's not a finance role where you're just obviously managing finance. You are effectively driving the rest of the organisation. So, and back to Daniel's point around making a safe space where you can enable to fail as well. But looking forward around what are the technologies potentially we're going to adopt, and we've spoken about AI a little bit as well. And all of the platforms that we've rolled out in the last 12 months all have the ability to do it. But how do you make sure that you're actually solving the right problems, rather than putting the solutions before the problems, which is generally what we do as well. So I think it's a shifting state where that CIO needs to adapt, and we've spoken about CDOs and sort of other types of roles like chief of AI as well. Those roles will start to evolve. So I think the CIO needs to be really putting their thinking cap on to determine how do we actually feed those roles into the CIO role, rather than having them as a separate outside.
Agreed. I heard a stat the other day and it spooked me, but I'm ever the optimist that I think I heard by 2050, 400 to 600 million jobs globally will be displaced. My optimism is, and hopefully AI will find more roles than it actually displaces, and that's an excitement I have around the future of robotics, the future of biotech, the future of health services. There are jobs out there we don't even yet quite know about, which is exciting. But I'm going to go right back to the beginning, which is I think communication skills and problem solving skills and critical thinking skills will be even more important into the future as we watch kind of some of those dangerous jobs or mundane jobs no longer are needed, which will be great. They can kind of lose those to AI, but then to think about the new roles that will come from that. And then what will a CIO need? Stevie said it before, wide skills around problem solving, critical thinking, communication. I think the more we get that out and get that topical and being talked about, the more we'll see CIOs, stepping into those roles and really saying, hey, these are core, the soft skills are really core to my role.
So important.
I would love to see more of that.
So I want to just mention, guys, I noticed that the female representation at this table is fantastic as well. I just want to make that point. But Stevie, when it comes to women in tech, where have you seen us come leaps and bounds? I feel like we've come leaps and bounds in female representation, but we've still got a fair way to go, don't we?
Yeah, I was going to say, we still have a fair way to go. I think there's many a time where I'm the only female in the room, or like a few, especially when it comes to like tech specific meetings or conferences or whatever. But we have to come a long way. I think the thing is, a lot of the programs that are aimed university type students, and I just think that's too late. I'm a really big fan of getting kids interested, primary school kids interested in technology, because they are then more likely to choose the subjects. And not year 9 and 10 is like when you really start choosing your electives. It frames what you do in 11 and 12, it frames what you study at uni, and then it frames what you want to do in a career. So like really showing the younger children, actually tech's not just about coding, because some people are not interested in engineering or whatever, but there's a broad number of things that you can do. And again, from the beginning, explaining that actually in this industry, in technology, we're not lifting bricks. So there's no physiological difference between a man and a woman when it comes to technology, because our brains are the same. So you have, your foundations are both equal, and therefore it's just about piquing the interest.
Yeah, definitely. I know they're really focusing on STEM projects at schools as well. And Mel, I know you're super passionate about female representation in IT as well. I mean, tell us about where you think we're going.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. I think absolutely they're focused on young, but I would say even focusing on my background. I mean, I didn't come up learning technology, and I went through my career and then discovered that I really like change. And so I think it is about thinking about it differently, and then how we mentor, support, coach and help others make the transition into technology, but then also making sure we've got people. It's not just at one particular level, but we've got people ready, and we're coaching and helping people come up as well. So a big focus for me is getting leaders into the business in technology, and I think it changes the conversation. So I think there's much more diverse thought. I think there's innovation, there's partnering. I think it's great when you've got the right mix around the table, and often it can be confronting. So I think if you've got the right support around you, I think we can really create a great opportunity to females to come into technology at all levels. So,
well, I want to say a big thank you to all of you for being here today. It's been a fantastic discussion, and I look forward to seeing you at our next one. Thank you.